This is Jocko Podcast number 16 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
We couldn't have been more excited. It was a real mission. None of us had been on a real mission before, except for our LPO, which is our leading petty officer, who was in the first Gulf War, and our platoon commander, who was in on the Grenada invasion and fought at the radio tower. Those guys had this small amount of combat experience. But at the time, for us, that was a world apart from what we had, because the rest of us had zero. This was the 90s. There was no war going on. And so now, here we were, with a real mission on deck. 1994, I think I was about 23 years old. I'm in my second SEAL platoon. And at the time, being in a SEAL platoon was literally the sole purpose and focus of my life. It was my whole world. And that's what most of my platoon mates were like as well. That's what we were. And this was an awesome platoon, a great platoon. The ARG Alpha platoon. And as far as having tight friends and a brotherhood inside of a platoon, this was definitely one of the best that I was ever in, if not the best. And all of us were just 100% about being in a SEAL platoon, and it was the world to us. And we didn't care about anything else, really. Not politics, domestic politics, or international politics. We weren't sitting around and reading newspapers, and we barely even watched the news at this time. We were deployed on a ship. There was no internet. We were troopers. You know, we were errand boys, as Colonel Kurtz says in Apocalypse Now. We didn't know about the policy, but we sure as hell would enforce it. And so we had this mission, and we were fired up. We were, like I said, we were on a ship, and we were off the coast of Africa. And there was something going on in one of the countries there. And during the last deployment that SEALs did on a ship at this time, it was some of our fellow SEALs, guys that we knew had gone into Somalia. And so that was a real mission. And we kind of thought maybe this will be our opportunity. And probably 7 or 8 months prior to this, the Battle of Mogadishu had taken place, which is, you know, where the movie Black Hawk Down came from. So this was Africa. This was like our chance to get into some kind of combat. And we started hearing more about the situation where they might send us. It looked like we were going to go in and provide some kind of security. And then it looked like we were going to go in and maybe help some Americans that were there and get them out. And then it looked like we might go in and reinforce some kind of UN troops. And like a bunch of missions. And they kind of changed as the situation developed. And we started reading about what was happening and what we were going to be going to do and what the situation was there on the ground. And I didn't understand it at first. But there was people killing each other by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands of people were being killed, but it wasn't like a war that, you know, I had read about or I'd seen in the movies. They weren't shooting each other with guns or dropping bombs on each other. They were using machetes, like a horror movie. Hundreds of thousands of people being butchered. And what was it all about? It was a tribal difference that's barely distinguishable to us. I mean, it's barely distinguishable for them. The country was Rwanda. And the event came to be known as the Rwandan Genocide, a mass murder primarily of Tutsi tribesmen by the rival Hutu clan. Now, war is something that I can rationalize, right? Maybe I shouldn't be able to do that, but I can. I mean, there's some kind of wrong or evil in the world that needs to be stood up against. You know, is it fascism? Is it tyranny? Is it terrorism? It's forces of darkness. And they're pitted against forces of light, forces of freedom and democracy. And as I say all the time, war is hell. And it should be a last resort when everything else has failed. And that being said, war is necessary sometimes to stop evil. And sometimes it's the only way to stop evil. But this idea here, this situation where people are killing each other in a mob type scenario, and they're literally doing it like a horror movie. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like a horror movie that seems too insane and too bloody to even be believable. You take the worst horror movie you can imagine with the worst plot line, and this makes less sense. It wouldn't even be believable if it was a horror movie. It's too much. It's too violent and too ruthless, and there's too much to even comprehend or understand. And this is, I hope that this is somewhere at the limit of the evil that human beings are capable of. You hear me talk about the darkness, the evil in the world. Well, this is it.